So there we go for Larissa's Borges presentation. So third focus group from last year, or first one for this year, if you wish. Larissa, you can go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank Giovanna, Justine, and this group for inviting me for this discussion. I also want to thank Professor Valkyria, my advisor in my doctoral studies, for being here today. And as Tassinari was saying, I teach at the Federal University of Pará State in Belém. It's the capital of the Amazon region of Brazil. And it's a pleasure to share with you the complex dynamic model of autonomy development, which is the result of my doctoral research, which investigated the autonomization trajectory of undergraduate students of English throughout the 4 years of the TEFL University program. Before I start, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. I will present my model and discuss some data generated in my research to better illustrate the model, and talk about the context in which I've been discussing the model at your university in a teacher education context. So this presentation is about 30 minutes, and I would prefer answering to the questions after the presentation. So this research uses the lens of complexity paradigm to better understand learner autonomy. So the complexity theory, according to Larson, Freeman, and Cameron, studies systems with different types of elements, usually in large numbers, which connect and interact in different and changing ways. In this animation from my dissertation, I illustrate how I understand language learning as a complex system. It's complex because it involves a huge number of elements, agents, and processes, such as the students, the colleagues, the teacher, the advisor, the motivation, beliefs, identities, autonomy, and many others. It's dynamic because these elements interact in changing ways along time. And sometimes some interactions are more evident than others, like you can observe in the connecting points of this animation. So language learning emerges from these interactions. So considering all these innumerable components are part of this wide system called language learning, in my research, I'm trying to investigate one of these components, autonomy. So I try to use magnifying lens to better comprehend the interactions that may occur in autonomy development. In my research, I discuss the trajectory of studies on learner autonomy in the literature, dividing it in 3 different perspectives. The individual perspective, in the primary color yellow, is marked by the concept of autonomy from Olek as the ability to take charge of one's own learning. It centers in the learner independence and self-directed learning. The social perspective, in the primary color blue, centers in the interdependence and collaboration among learners and other agents. It also focuses on the social participation of learners in their communities, empowering them to become more active members in these communities. Finally, the complex perspective, in the secondary color green, integrates both individual and social perspectives to the learning context. So instead of the dichotomy individual or social autonomy, it conceives the social and individual autonomy. In this animation, I try to illustrate here their mutual influence. And it shows that in a complex perspective, individual and social autonomy are interconnected and may impact each other. So I took this complex perspective of autonomy into account when I elaborated the model. I was interested in understanding how learners may experience their autonomy in different contexts and in different experiences. Therefore, in this research, I aimed at investigating the learner's autonomy trajectory, not only observing how they learned the additional language, but also how learners became more active members of the academic community during this process. Then, in my conception, autonomy is considered a complex dynamic system, individual and social, interconnected with other learning subsystems such as motivation, identities, beliefs, and emotions, with which it interacts in different ways and in diverse contexts, going through moments of setbacks, stability, and advances throughout life. Later, when I will present the results, the research data, it's possible to observe this dynamicity and the moments of stability, setbacks, and advances in the autonomization of participants. I also discuss the contribution of different authors in the literature who proposed models of autonomy development, such as Noonan, Charlet and Szabó, Benson, and Tassinari. At first, autonomy was seen as a more linear process. Then, along time, this understanding has changed. The dynamic model proposed by Tassinari that you already discussed here is an amazing work and shows the non-linearity of autonomy development and how dynamic this process is. Then I will present my contribution to this research field. And my goal was to propose a model of autonomy development that could illustrate the complexity of this phenomenon. So the complex dynamic model of autonomy development, just a moment. Okay, which I call CDMA, is represented as a web accounting for multiple possibilities of interactions and mutual influence among all its manifold components along time. At the center of the model lies autonomization as a complex process, and the manifold components were presented in different colors to facilitate their identification. The components that give support to autonomy development are illustrated in red. They are the reflection, which is a supradimension since it's desirable in the whole autonomy process, and collaboration and negotiation, which are important resources in the autonomization. The nested subsystems that influence autonomy are in blue. They are motivation, identities, affect, beliefs, among others. In my research, the data generated showed how strong was the impact of these subsystems in the autonomization of the participants. And since this is an open system, here in the base of the model, there is also space for other subsystems that may impact autonomy a long time. The movements of autonomy development are here in green. I acknowledge it's hard to read these components in the screen, so I'm going to read them for you. Planning, action, emergence, empowerment, transformation, and evaluation. It's important to mention that these primary movements of autonomy development suggested in the model do not occur in a linear sequence due to the complexity and unpredictability of this process. The context here, it's not a background in complexity theory, and it's a dynamic part of the system that also influences autonomy. It's illustrated here by means of a dotted outline in gray that in a broad and fluid way permeates all the interactions represented in the model. It was easier to see this in the animation. So, and the contextual aspects are in orange. They are the agents with whom learners interact, the affordances of the environment, and the attractors or attractor states, that is, the patterns of behavior preferred by the system in its trajectory. For example, patterns of dynamism or stability of the system. As you could see in the animation of the model, autonomization has an emergent feature. Autonomy emerges from the different contextual interactions learners experience along their trajectories. Sometimes participation in a new project or interacting with a new agent, such as an advisor, or using a different material to learn brings change in this system in which new patterns of behavior, autonomous behaviors emerge. So in my doctoral dissertation, defended in 2019, I investigated the English learning trajectory of 4 undergraduate TEFL students along the course. And they were first-year students, and they were real beginners of English. It was a longitudinal qualitative study, and the method was a multiple case study. The instruments used to generate data were learning diaries and an interview by the end of the course. The learning diaries were written along the first 5 semesters at university, when the students take English language courses from level 1 to 5. They wrote 3 diaries in each semester, totalizing 60 diaries. My research question was, how was the autonomization process developed in the English language trajectory of the participants in the TEFL undergraduate program? In this image called Balcony from Escher, I try to illustrate complexity researches. Despite the focus of my research being autonomy, represented by the central magnified image, the influence of other surrounding elements such as the context, the light, the wind, also need to be taken into account. And they also influence the investigated phenomenon. Therefore, I try to observe the influence of the context and other elements of the system and how they impacted learners' autonomy in this research. I won't be able to talk about the 4 participants' trajectories, but I'm going to show some data from one of them, Marília, to illustrate the complexity of her autonomy trajectory, with moments of dynamism, moments of dynamic stability, and moments of change. Change, by the way, is a concept, is a key concept in autonomy, in complexity paradigm. So I also have to mention that in the first semester in college here, students take a course called Learning to Learn Foreign Languages that focuses on learner autonomy. So Marília, in her first semester, she makes this reflection in her first diary. She mentions, with the theories in the classroom, I realized that I need to take responsibility for my language learning, that I shouldn't depend only on the teacher, and that my difficulty can be overcome, including security. The fact that my classmates already speak English has motivated me to study more, because I need to work hard to learn the language, but to be also proficient like them. So we notice Marília's ability to reflect about her autonomy since the beginning of the course. And since language learning is an unpredictable system, the fact her classmates were already fluent and she was a beginner didn't take her motivation away. Instead, her vision of future self as a proficient student like her classmates motivates her to become more autonomous. And through her diaries, we all observe she was doing very well, taking the responsibility for her learning. Her autonomy system was very dynamic at that time. She was using different strategies and interacting with different agents and elements, affordances to learn English. as she refers in her diaries in this first year. So relating this experience to the CDMA, the most evident interactions in Marilla's system at this moment of dynamism in autonomy trajectory are her reflection, her learner identity, her motivation, different affordances used, among others. But later on her second year, something very important happens in Marilla's life. And at that period, we notice more stability in her autonomy trajectory. She mentions, at the moment, I'm facing problems organizing my time. I even plan a study period, but I can't do it, especially now that the twins demand more attention. So on this excerpt, we observe her identity as a mother impacting her autonomy in language learning. She complains in her other diaries, she lost her daily contact with the target language. And then she adds, my current difficulty continues to be speaking and now also reading in English, because I'm having a lot of difficulty with academic texts. At the moment, I'm just. And then she says, I believe that the last semester was very demotivating for me because I feel as if everything I had already learned has gone downhill. My main difficulty continues to be speaking. In addition, I think I have emotional problems related to language because I feel very insecure now more than ever speaking in the target language. So in that moment, affected by emotional problems like insecurity, her capacity for reflection and for autonomous action seems to be in a dynamic stability pattern. And she feels her learning and also her autonomy to set back. Besides the difficulty to organize an agenda of studies, it's also difficult for her to reflect and make appropriate choices regarding the best strategies to use. She prefers to use strategies she's already comfortable with, like watching movies that are not necessarily helpful to improve her speaking skills and academic reading. And she cannot see any improvements, so she lacks her motivation. So if we check Marilla's system relating to CDMA, the most evident interactions now in this moment of stability seems to inhibit her autonomization. We can see here her identity as a mother, her lack of motivation, affective problems, and these factors are impacting her reflection, her planning, her use of strategies and affordances, and impacting her autonomy actions. So, but the autonomy as a complex and open system continues moving on, and Marilla makes different connections in the third year. And here in our college, we offer language advising to our students, and Marilla exercised her autonomy when she interacts with a new agent, a language advisor. And after some time, she mentions in her diary, considering my difficulties reported in the last diaries, I believe there has been great progress in my English learning, mainly in speaking, since we have been working a lot with this in the last semester in the advising sessions. At the moment, I don't have a definite difficulty because with the help of my advisor, we created strategies to improve my reported difficulties as well, such as writing. So here, this is a new moment of change, and we notice the dynamicity is back in her autonomy trajectory. As she said, with the help of her advisor, she starts to use new strategies, appropriate strategies to improve her skills. So we notice here in the other diaries that she wrote at that period, that the emergence of new autonomy behaviors. So she feels confident now. So if we check here the most evident interactions in Marilia's systems at this moment of change and dynamism relating to the model, we see the collaboration of a new agent, the negotiation of new strategies, reflection, evaluation, positive emotions such as confidence, motivation, among others. It's important to reinforce that in this complex web of interactions in autonomization, it's not only the quantity of interactions that matters, but the quality of these interactions. The interaction with the advisor promoted change in Marilia's trajectory, but it didn't happen in the trajectory of other two participants in this research. So the quality of the interactions is related to the ability to promote changes, to help generate new autonomous behaviors. In the second moment of the analysis, I interpreted the participants' autonomization trajectories according to the CDMA model, and this is a graphic representation of Marilia's autonomization system. And to conclude this discussion of the data analysis, I would like to bring only two excerpts of Marilia's final interview when she reflects on her own autonomy along the course. So she mentions in the interview, sorry. One of the things I learned is that we have to protect motivation, and I tried to do that, but it's something very complex. Autonomy and motivation were something that complemented each other. So it was something I tried to do all the time. So along Marilia's trajectory, we verify a high level of reflection. Many times she uses the theory learned about autonomy to guide her autonomy practices. As I mentioned in CDMA, reflection is a supradimension. And I believe her level of reflection was fundamental to overcome the many challenges she faced exercising her autonomy. She usually mentions the mutual influence between autonomy and motivation in her diaries. It's interesting that for the final research paper, students have to write and defend in English as a mandatory requirement to graduate. Marilia chose to study the fluctuation of her own motivation along the course, and she used her diaries, her learning diaries, to investigate her motivation. And here we verify how successful was her trajectory. Marilia was a real beginner, and after 4 years, she was fluent like she dreamed about, and she received an A in the final research paper, something that meant a lot for her. And in this last excerpt, we notice the teacher identity emerging in Marilia's trajectory, influencing her autonomy. Now she's working hard to become the teacher she dreams to be. I'm going to read this excerpt. I really want to be a teacher, which is a dream, which has been going on for a long time. Sometimes I keep asking myself, will I be able to be a good teacher? For me, I don't want to be a teacher for the sake of being. I want to be something different for my students. I want that from what I teach them, they can have a bigger vision or conquer something, travel to another place, or have proficiency in the language. Sometimes I even think that I want to be a teacher with a complex vision, because as I went through all this, I have experienced language learning, its difficulties, its overcomings. I believe that my view of the student has to be different. And I believe that I will be able to walk this path to be a good professional, and I will study a lot for this. So this is a meaningful reflection of Marilia as a teacher to be, showing her empathic view toward her future students. And it shows a reflection of about her ideal self as a language teacher. And after graduating from college, she started to teach kids in her community. So in the final part of my presentation, I would like to share the main context in which I've been using the model and discussing the model with my TEFL students in the course Learning to Learn Foreign Languages. This is the course I teach for first year students in the first semester. As I briefly mentioned, it aims to help students manage and regulate their learning and autonomy development throughout the course and beyond. In this course, we discuss the CDMA model, and we also discuss the trajectory of the 4 participants of my research. And by reading and discussing the participants' trajectories, it helps the first year students to understand more the complexity of this autonomy trajectory, since they usually relate to their participants' experiences. And after discussing the model, students are encouraged to reflect on the strengths of their autonomy, attention, and investment, associating their learning experiences with the theory studied. So this is a rich moment of reflection and self-knowledge for the students. And I've been teaching this course for the last 10 years. And the last years, including the complexity component. And we noticed reflecting about autonomy impacts their trajectory along their undergraduate course in a positive way. In this course, we also discuss about the teacher autonomy and the role of the teacher to encourage learners' autonomy. And I've been collecting feedback about the impact of the use of the model in the students' trajectories as learners and as teachers to be. I would like to read these comments on the students' feedback on the model. So I believe the model helps me to view learning English as my responsibility as a student. I realize the need to take responsibility mainly over the processes of reflection, planning, and evaluation of my learning, so that I can be aware of the repercussion of the elements of this system in my English studies. This model will help me in my acquisition of English, because from it, I got to know which elements interact with each other, how I can make them relate in a way that benefits my learning. And I learned the effect of knowing my identities, beliefs, and not excluding the affective side of this process. By holding all this knowledge, not only will I benefit myself, but in the future, I will drink from these waters to help my students in the classroom. The theory contributes with the notion that I must keep my learning system always in movement, that I must always seek strategies and do my best with the available affordances, even if they are the most adverse. I must observe myself and see how the elements behave, adjusting what is effective for my learning as a student and for the learning of my students in the future when I'm in the teacher position. So in this freshman students' feedback about the model, we notice an understanding of autonomy as a complex phenomenon being influenced by many aspects. And about the implications for teaching, the feedback received on the model suggests its potential for reflection, for self-awareness of the aspects that make the learning system to change or to stabilize, and its potential for the management of autonomy in language learning. It's also interesting that when we discuss the model, the students make use of meta-language to explain their own language learning trajectories, indicating a higher level of reflection of the matter. The study of the model enables the integration of theory and practice and helps raising a learner's awareness and enhancing autonomy development. Regarding the impacts on teacher education, we hope the model may contribute to the reflection of autonomy in language teaching, like Nadia and Danilo commented on the last slide, about their desire of becoming teachers who foster autonomy in their future language classes. And to conclude, I would like to emphasize the complex, fluctuating, personalized, and lifelong character of the autonomization process. I also emphasize the centrality of the interactions in this process, as at certain times, the interactions between certain components were more evident and led to change. What matters, as we discussed here, is the quality of the interactions between learners and the manifold components of the system, what can generate significant changes from which new autonomous behaviors emerge. So emergence is, in autonomy trajectory, is also emphasized in this study. So the goal of the model is not only contributing to the development of linguistic competence, but also contributing to language teacher education and to the emergence of the autonomy teacher identity. And I believe the model may be used to enhance autonomy in other contexts from different areas as well. Next month, I'm going to use the model in a course I will teach about autonomy for students of different areas at the Master's Graduate School in Creativity and Innovation in Higher Education that I work at the moment. So Valkyria is also teaching a complexity course at graduate school this semester, and the model has been discussed there also. So mentioning some limitations of the model, one of them is the limited use of the model by other researchers. I've been using in my classes in undergraduation and now in graduate school. In Brazil, Nicolaides, who also researches autonomy, has used the model with her learners at university in Rio de Janeiro. Then it would be interesting if other researchers, not only in Brazil, but in different cultures, may use the CDMA model. It would be interesting to observe what emerged in different cultures. So this is the beginning of my research trajectory, and I'm really glad to hear now your feedback, contributions, or questions. Thank you for your attention.